Good evening, and welcome to the Philosophy of Lost. My name is Joshua Landy. This is Lanier Emerson. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our sponsors, the Philosophy and Literature Initiative, the Film and Media Studies Program, the DLCL, the Europe Center, and the Stanford Humanities Center. We also want to thank all of our wonderful volunteers, Melanie Conroy, Rachel Christie, David Fresco, Alex Greenhuff, Ann Hamilton, Nick Landry, Christy Kikikero, and Jeremy Sable. Christy put together the short video montage you're about to see. A quick word about the format of tonight's event. We'll be interviewing Michael Emerson for about 40 minutes or so, and then we'll open things up to the audience. There's a microphone right here. So if you have a question, that's where you're going to need to be. We welcome all questions except ones that don't have to do with Lost and ones that don't have to do with philosophy, but any other kinds. And please note that flash photography is not permitted. Michael Emerson is, as you all know, an extremely accomplished actor. He's also extremely modest and has forbidden me from giving you all the details of his illustrious career, including playing alongside Kevin Spacey in the famous New York production of The Iceman Cometh, winning not one but 2 Emmy Awards, and starring in a dozen movies. So he could prevent me from saying all that, but he can't stop us from showing some of the highlights of his career on Lost. Lights, please. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Emerson.
Feel now. Give us an hour.
Michael, thank you so much for coming here to Stanford to talk about the philosophical implications of Lost and your work on Lost.
Nice to be here.
I want to start by asking a question about the overarching frame of the show as a kind of contest between good and evil. What we learn at the end of the show is that the whole thing turned out to be this sort of Job-like bet-settling experiment between Jacob and the Man in Black. According to the Man in Black, everyone's corruptible. It's in their very nature to sin. Jacob says, I brought these people here to prove that my brother was wrong. So, what do you make of this contest between the 2 brothers? What it says about the people on the island and the states of the island itself?
I think about them the way I think about everything else in the show, which is it ends up being different than what we first thought. I know it did seem like Jacob and his brother were rulers of some sort, or were in charge, or had this large representation of the forces of light and darkness. But the more I think about it, you know how in Lost, every season the camera lens pulls back further and we get more context. The more I think about it, I think maybe they were in charge of nothing. Maybe they were being tested as well. And theirs was a more diabolical test because they were given what they thought was an immortality. I'm just throwing that out there.
And the consequences of that immortality turned out to be what for them?
Well, A, not immortality, and B, the seduction of absolute power.
But that starts to sound like you're with the Man in Black, right? That in fact, at the end of the day, they come, they fight, they corrupt, they destroy. It's always the same. You get power, you get corrupt.
I know he said that. And it's a kind of admirable statement, and up until the point when he said it, I think it was probably an apt observation. But I don't know. He's an attractive character, and you're asking the man that killed Jacob. So
I thought we weren't going to confuse you with your character. Wasn't that in the
wasn't an answer, I'm sorry.
And it's a funny ending, isn't it? Because the ending gives you that great surge of satisfaction that the happy Hollywood ending does, that good has defeated evil. But when you stop and think about it, you think, wait a minute, that wasn't the question. The question wasn't whether good is stronger. The question was more, is good right? You know, can good convince evil or something like that? Who's right? You know, can Jacob? You know, Jacob's intention, as he stated it, was to convince the man, like to show him. I bring him here to prove him wrong, and all he does is kill him. So, does that mean that he was wrong and he had to resort to violence?
In the process, Jacob has his way. In the process, Jacob prevails. He must sacrifice himself. I don't know if he did that consciously. But
in what sense do you think Jacob prevails?
I think a newer, tenderer, and more empathic regime comes to power in that place or non-place that, for lack of a better term, we'll call the island.
That suggests that you think that Jacob's behavior toward these people that he brings there is tenderer and more empathic.
Well,
Instead of
Hurley's
manipulative
is. Yeah.
The new regime.
Well, but for that to count as a case of Jacob's prevailing, then it has to count as what Jacob would have, or what's in the spirit of Jacob's enterprise. But Jacob's enterprise is to bring a bunch of people there who don't understand what's happening to them and not really help them figure out what they need to know in order to succeed.
But his enterprise does seem to be hopeful. I think he clings to the hope that someone will make good of it, that someone will be transformed or made better in this crucible that he thinks he's in charge of.
He let Alex die.
He distracted Saeed while Nadia got hit by a car.
Yeah. But in a sense, sometimes I think those scenes are a piece of fiction created for the benefit of the test subject. That the only person that really counts is the subject of the moment. That those events were a test of Saeed's mettle, a test of Ben's mettle, a curveball thrown them to further complicate their test.
So Jacob is willing to use Alex as an instrument, a mere means, in order to test them. And this is good.
It's
because
it seems like that's. I mean, it kind of seems like that's what the writers are doing.
yeah.
But now we're getting that thing of, this is, how seriously we take these events, because they are, after all, crafted by, writers who live in Los Angeles, and they have their own.
And Los Angeles has its own place as a character in the show.
Right.
And lives its life as a kind of contrast space to the
Right.
island.
Interesting that Los Angeles is the longed-for destination. It's a showbiz parable.
So
They're just auditioning.
You feel the force of that.
Yes, I can relate to that.
Let me offer another possibility there. I'd be interested to know what you think of. One thing that struck me watching the show is that there's this really interesting intermingling of belief systems, including religious or mystical belief systems. And so one thing there's obviously a lot to say in that, but one thing I want to draw out is the pseudo yin-yang motifs, and in particular the scales with the
the white marble and the black marble that we see in the cave, and you also see in that painting.
Yeah.
I'm tempted to see a suggestion there that at the end of the day is a kind of a competition between two very different belief systems, a more Christian one on which good ultimately has to prevail over evil, and something like a kind of Eastern mystical one on which there has to be a balance, and that if you take the black stone off the scales and throw it into the sea, you've thrown things out of alignment.
Yeah. I think sometimes those symbologies are local rather than general in the telling of the story, so that the black and white marbles serve that set of symbols works best for the Jacob and Man in Black episodes, but might not necessarily be, a taste of the overarching series religious system. I think in general the writers are interested in a kind of pan-religious message, and also interested in integration. And I think they're attracted to the idea that lots of religious systems pose a cosmogony of opposites. And we see it played out in the drama time after time on the series of, people being drawn in from the fringes into the grayer center. And maybe the journey of the series is one of integration. Those who were younger, wilder, more violent, more ugly, or more idealistic on the other scale. Everyone is mellowed or tempered in the course of, you could call it life, or the test of this crucible where they found themselves.
I really had the unshakable sense that they wanted to create this kind of synthetic melding of, or they wanted to create a vision in which we draw heavily on important insights from different religious traditions which have a kind of co-equal status, but that in the final episode, basically it's all subsumed under a Christian frame. Jack is this guy who sacrifices himself, he's wounded in the side. There are these various symbols in the church that everybody meets up in.
That system of Christian images is one that they employed, I think, because it has a great currency. Those things read instantly. The wound in Christ's side, and doubting Thomas who needs to put his finger in it, and all those things. I mean, they're themes of the show. The writers use, the writers are mowing through material intellectually, to keep these balls in the air, and they'll use whatever they can lay hands on, and enjoy doing it, and enjoy mixing it up for the audience's delectation, I think, so that people can, aha. There's so many little ahas in the watching of Lost, and I personally enjoy it.
Yeah.
And so, I think they, on the other hand, they went out of their way to suggest a kind of pan-religiosity at the ending. I think the stained glass window has symbols from every known religion in it, and as far as the sacrificial redeemer, that's Christ-like, but it's also common to many religious systems also. So they're just trying to keep the story going, but they're doing it in quite a smart way. And I think it's cool that so many of our writers came from a science fiction background, where that kind of use of religious material is more current, and the cannibalizing of it and the intermingling of it is part and parcel of what they do, and they tick that way. And I think it was one of the things that made the show fun.
You're thinking of Battlestar Galactica, things like that? Or...
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the scale image for a second. I mean, you were pointing out that the use of that image has a certain kind of resonance in the Jacob and Man in Black centered episodes that it doesn't necessarily have in the rest of the show. And in the painting, it's in Charles Whitmore's space, and this contest of the white, or balance of the white stones and the black stones doesn't really seem to be the controlling aspect of Ben Linus's relationship with Charles Whitmore. And I wondered how you imagined that relationship, the relationship between Ben Linus and Charles Whitmore.
Well, I think all that business of scales and black and white is emblematic of one of the big themes of the show, which is evaluation and judgment. You know, how many black stones do you have? How many white stones do you have? Can you accumulate more? How would you do that? How can you be cleansed or transformed and made better? I think the Whitmore-Ben Linus relationship is not under that umbrella very much. I think they are two fine shades of ambition. They're a split hair's distance apart in terms of ruthlessness or corruption, maybe. And that one of them is traveling one direction on the scale of good and evil, and I think that the other one is going maybe the other way. But I mean, we all know where our sympathy lies after, well, certainly after Alex is killed. You know who you like. Or am I living in a fool's paradise? I didn't even answer your question.
Well, that raises another question about goodness. So you talked about two characters who are shades of the same, very dark gray. There's a lot of talk in the show about certain people being one of the good ones. You're one of the good ones. But it's not always clear why they're supposed to be good. I mean, it seems as though people like Sawyer, the con man, can be good, one of the good ones, and Saeed, Imperial Guard, torturer, could be one of the good ones. Do you have a view about that? I mean, what makes somebody one of the good ones?
Well, I think when the writers first had Ben utter that line, I think it was to get a rise out of the audience, because it seemed like the last thing that anyone would believe. But then there's, as the show progresses, those who, I don't even know if the authors intended this, but those who were other, when we learned more about them, when we grew more familiar with them and more comfortable with them, we began to see them less emblematically and in more dimension. And so they became less other and more complex or possibly likable, so that he eventually, I think in hindsight, the audience goes, wow, I think he meant that. I think he meant that when he said it. Because later on, when we learn that Ben is engaged in this much larger battle with, the forces of Whitmore and the forces of darkness and all these other things that are, if not shown, then at least suggested, then we have a little more fellow feeling with them. So part of their agenda, I think, or one of the writers' messages is that we talked about this. We tend to judge our perceived enemies in a really flat way. We make them two-dimensional boogeymen, sort of, and it's easy and somehow satisfying and comforting to perceive others that way. But it robs us of a little of our steam when they are humanized.
So, is Ben Linus ahead of us in that respect, because after all, when the castaways arrive, it's his immediate assumption that some of them are good and are to be therefore kidnapped and brought into us.
Tortured.
Whereas maybe other ones are a threat and not good. So he draws distinctions. He's a philosopher.
That was back when he was kind of a bad egg. I know he just saw raw material for his big agenda. They needed bodies, they needed fertile women, all of that. I don't know what to say about that phrase of the story.
So when he says to Ethan Rom or whoever, go off, these are the good ones, that's ideological mystification. He's trying to keep them in the mindset.
Because another possibility is that I think maybe you already denied this earlier, but is that Jacob has told Ben, or somehow got the message to Ben.
Through Richard.
Right, thank you. Here's the list of the good ones, right? And we've got a new batch, and here are the good ones, and these are the ones you need to bring here, turn to candidates, that kind of thing. In which case, maybe we could trust a little bit more this idea that there's something special about them, that they are somehow different from the other survivors, there's something good, whatever that means.
Is that what he meant? Did he mean they were morally good, upstanding?
That's the question.
I thought he meant they're good candidates for artificial insemination. What did you think? We'll get to that later.
So, I mean, here's another aspect of Ben's sense of what's good. When Ben summons Smokey, what is he thinking? Is he thinking, I'm bringing some goodness into our neighborhood? Or is he thinking that this is unmitigatedly evil, but he can use it for his purposes?
I think it was a tool that he thought he had control of. I think he was respectful of the tool. It's a terrifying tool. But then late in the game, in was it season 5 or season 6, he says, I finally realized all the while I thought I was summoning it, it was summoning me. Which is
Troubling.
Yeah, that's a great thing to say, though. That his behavior was what was predictable, manipulable.
So so this brings us a little bit back to the meta contest, or the meta test of Jacob and the Man in Black. So the Man in Black is manipulating Ben. Is Jacob any less manipulating Ben or the other candidates? In what sense is Jacob somehow, why does he get to wear the white shirt?
Well, it's interesting. If you think that the Man in Black, let's say that he equals Satan and Jacob equals what? God? Then that's an interesting personification of a God, isn't it? It's a manipulative and careless kind of God figure, isn't it?
Yeah.
One who seems capricious, sets things in motion, chooses here, denies there, creates these tests, puts people in stress situations, and then seems to be absent when they need to get out of it.
Sounds good to me.
So,
I mean, you were saying earlier that with, in the case of Saeed, distracting Saeed, you were almost presenting it as a test of faith. It sounds like something that people would say God does.
well, in that sense, then, I think the writers meant it to be read that way, and maybe a couple of other ways at the same time. But I think clearly they meant for us to grow a little suspicious or a little weary of the way he operates.
Exactly there, it seems like there's a strange parallelism between what they do to us by first getting us to sympathize with the castaways and then getting us to see the others from within. First, Jacob wears the white shirt, and eventually we come to see that the man in black is just a guy who wants to travel. What's so bad about that?
And it's interesting that the Satan figure, or the man in black, he's not in there messing around, pushing buttons, setting stuff up. He's hanging out somewhere. His work gets done without him lifting a finger. Jacob's always, fiddling.
Well, he has to turn himself into a smoke monster every day. And every day.
Yeah. But are the writers therefore telling us that the man in black is right about the bet? He doesn't have to do anything. He just sits back and waits to reel them in. They come, they fight, they corrupt.
Well, that's a viewpoint that is a common one, isn't it?
I reckon so. Let me shift gears for a second. So, another really important strand of thought in the show is that somehow we are creatures of our past, or that our deepest, most important selfhood is bound up in some important way or other with our past. So, on the one hand, but even this, the writers seem to want to play with us a little bit. So, on the one hand, the past seems really important to people. Especially in the early seasons of the show, there's this heavy focus on flashbacks, which seemed to be designed to explain to us who these characters really are, what matters to them, what formed their genuine self. And when Smokey comes and gets you, he shows you pictures of your past misdeeds. On the other hand, in the end, Jack says, it doesn't matter where you were. And Jacob himself says, when they get here to the island, now the past doesn't matter. Now it's, as it were, a new chance for them to I don't know, become somebody completely different. Then why all the flashbacks? So what do you think about the role of the past in the constitution of the self, according to the show?
Well, all the characters on the show that we care about, they seem to be some accumulation. Their history humanizes each of them for us and draws us into the story of their development or transformation. And I think that interests people everywhere, this idea of, regardless of our past, we are perfectible or changeable, that we are as good as the present test. And everyone on Lost fares better and better with the present testing. And it means more if we see it in a context of past failures or weaknesses, I think.
So the past, maybe on that picture, sort of sets the problem that the tests are designed to get the person to address.
Yeah. The past is what Man in Black counts on. Frailty, mistakes, selfishness. And the present test is the thing that Jacob holds out hope for. That someone will pass into a clearer light. Someone will gain by the test, gain, wisdom or humanity or whatever.
I'm curious whether you read the scene between Ben and Locke, in which Ben commands Locke to kill his father in that light. Is that something connected to finding a new beginning, putting the past behind you facing the test as this moment?
Well, it serves that function on one level. I mean, what I'm playing in that scene is my people are wavering. I do not have their full confidence. Here is a man that some people are saying is going to be my replacement. So I think that's why Ben makes such a piece of show business out of it. You know, the giant columns and the flickering firelight and ragged people standing around with, saliva running out of their mouth. It's another big old test. And I think it suits Ben probably that John Locke fails that test in that moment. It serves Ben's political agenda.
That he fails by having somebody else kill him, or he fails by not killing him right away?
He has a failure of nerve. He hasn't the requisite ruthlessness in the moment. But that a moment like that, we have a conflation of a lot of themes, because there's all that father stuff in Lost. Who has a good dad in Lost? Nobody has a good dad. So
You're a tan?
yeah.
Nice enough guy.
So I think the writers, and one might question, where the writers are at in their relationships. But how many scenes of a kind of horrible, Oedipal fantasy fulfillment are there in the show where people are offered the opportunity to cut their own father's throat or push him out of a skyscraper or something like that? That's in there a lot, and I just have no comments about that.
That's a crucial piece of Ben's past, however. That
Yeah,
he's one of these
bad
guys.
dad, right?
Yeah, bad dad.
And he killed him.
He killed him.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Emerson.
So that goes right along with what we've been talking about. Yeah, that was a heinous turn of events for the character, and one of the only things I ever felt uncertain about. I mean, you get the scripts and you go in and you play it, but I thought, wow, really? I'm really going to do this? And then I thought, oh, this is all right. They'll put it in a fresh context later and it won't seem so bad. Did they do that? No, it remains. In fact, they changed the scene. They made the scene worse. When we originally shot it, I just put on a gas mask and we sat there and waited, and others released the gas. But then they did a reshoot with someone else's hands. I wasn't even there. Someone else's hands popping the top on the cyanide gas or whatever, and it looked like Ben just, sat there in the car and did his own father, and I thought, oh God, how am I going to come back from that?
So the character of Ben has a very special relationship with his past, because when he first arrives at the island, he, maybe because of his relationship with his father, is very fused with nostalgia of a certain sort. And then various things happen. And after he's wounded by Saeed, he's taken off and healed by the others at the cost of not remembering something. And so in an important sense, he's cut off from his past at that point.
What is it that he does not remember?
What is it that he doesn't remember? What do you imagine it is that he doesn't remember?
It's more than just memory. I think a piece of him is lost. A piece of, a piece of heart
Richard
is
named
lost.
this is innocence.
Innocence?
That's what Richard says.
Yeah, if by that you mean fellow feeling, empathy, tenderness, that seemed to have...
But he also doesn't remember, at least he does not remember Saeed. That's important.
Right.
He does remember being one of the Dharma Initiative. These are my people. He does remember, I guess, offing his dad. What do you think?
I think he remembers all of that, sure.
Does he still remember his mother?
He must, because he remembers childhood friends. Even as a grown man, he carries that carved wooden doll, which was a great hint at a cool storyline that we were just never able to pursue. My only regret from Lost is not finding out, what happened to the little girl that gave him the doll.
Oh, I think we know. but I don't want to spoil your happy beliefs about this. Can I ask you a related question? In the final season, the fifth season, something seemed to happen to them. I mean, so following the death of Alex, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what that felt like to you and what you felt was going on in Ben's character. It relates to this question of, who we are on the, within the world of the show. Who is somebody? Because it seemed as though Ben wasn't really Ben anymore. Something.
Right, he got all unhinged, and I felt a little unhinged myself. You play the scenes as they come, and you play what's on the page, but it was harder week by week to tell what his agenda was or what he was really after. I think he was transformed from a proactive character to a reactive character. Suddenly, his nerve got rattled, and then his resources began to fall away. He no longer had minions or armaments or suddenly he had to live by wits alone in severely reduced circumstances. And it was tough. He was scrambling. He was improvising, and I felt like I was too in the playing of the character. And maybe that's what the writers intended, was to make everything so much more uncertain.
Ben does have a mission then, though. He has a mission to get Penny. And in the crunch, he has the chance, and he hesitates.
Very un-Ben.
Yeah, because we expect such precision and
Ruthlessness.
cold efficiency from him. It all has to do with the child coming up from the cabin of the boat. I just think Ben couldn't pull the trigger with a child somewhere in harm's way.
Why?
Because he has a thing about children. I mean, they established that. Does that happen before or after we flash back and see how Ben stole Alex and saved her from Widmore? But that was an indication. That's a nice note of Ben's personality, his feeling for kids. So I think if some part of him was erased when he underwent the other baptism after he was shot, I think he held on to some kind of feeling or memory of childhood, of his own vulnerability.
So how does this affection for children relate to the role that his own childhood plays in his character? Going back to the question about the effect of the past on the shaping of the self, according to the show.
Yeah. Well, I always thought, and I think the most useful thought I ever had about Ben was that, talking about balance, some part of him is overdeveloped, cerebrally, or however you want to put it, but in turn, some part of him is underdeveloped. I think he has a maturity problem. I think he's really cool and brilliant, but hasn't a grown-up heart, sort of. I think he resorts to tantrums and rages sometimes when he gets crossed. It's not really attractive and not mature at all. But, like when he shows Juliet the dead body of her might-be paramour, and he gets all ugly and sour with her, and he really pitches a fit. You know, can't you see that you're mine? You know, he really misbehaves, and there's a number of times in the series where he gets cross and he behaves badly, and I liked that idea of him not being well developed in all areas.
So for the other characters, the past sets the problem that the test solves, or that the test addresses. And for Ben, the past, his childhood, is just who he is.
Well, maybe part of him was frozen at the time of his life-saving baptism. And there's that thing they always say in Hollywood, which is, your maturity is often frozen at the age of your great success. You know what I mean by that? So if you're an 18-year-old movie star and much celebrated, it's going to be extra difficult to continue to grow inside, maybe. This is just a show business parallel, but
Sounds good. John,
Maybe I can ask you one last question before we open it up. Along similar lines, so there's a character Dogen, and there's also a real-life Dogen. And real-life Dogen believed that what matters ultimately is letting go, which is, of course, a common theme in the final season. And in order to do that, you have to let go of yourself, who you are. But in order to do that, you have to first become it. And so I started wondering, with regard to Ben in the late part of the show, whether maybe, of course, we saw you, your character, saying, I still have a few things to work out. So maybe Ben isn't all the way there. I was wondering whether this sort of breaking of Ben couldn't be seen as something positive.
sure, that a crisis was forced on him, outside his control, to which he had to give himself over, for which there were no easy answers. I like that. And what you said about Dogen's philosophy, that's great. We don't get footnotes with the script. Why do they call him Dogen?
So before we open it up, I just have to ask, well, two more questions. We don't get to see much of your character's activity as number 2. And I wondered how you imagined his role as number 2 and his development, his possible maturation as number 2 under Hurley.
I always thought it must be a really pleasurable time for Ben to be in charge of a lot of things, but the weight of responsibility, of his own ambitions, of his own insecurities lifted from his shoulders, so that he's not the decision maker of last resort. He's an operative. And I think how great, and he must do it with a lift in his walk and whistling a happy tune as he goes about business at Hurley's behest. I just think it would be so great. I think that's the Ben we meet at the end outside the church.
Okay, so that brings me to my last question. What is it that you still have to work out?
Well, we talked about how there might be a couple of answers to that. One is, if that place, if the environs of that churchy place are a kind of purgatory or a kind of waiting room, an antechamber to the hereafter, I think Ben has done wickedness in his life. And maybe in some sense it isn't, what does Hamlet's father say, burnt and purged away. It's not, he still has a little, there's maybe just a skosh more atonement to be attended to. But also, you know how at the end, it was like the end of a Shakespearean comedy where everybody gets to waltz off into the hereafter 2 by 2?
Yes.
You know, the happy marriage dance and all of that. And Ben doesn't have a partner. And my interpretation of the ending was that people got to enter the hereafter once they had been matched up with their mirror redeemer, or their soul counterpart, the one in whose eyes they could find forgiveness. So I thought Ben still needs that, and I don't know who it would be, and I don't know how it helps him find his counterpart by sitting on that bench, but maybe everybody sooner or later walks by.
I think it's Los Angeles.
So those were my two thoughts about Ben's situation.
Pretty good, pretty good. I think we should open it up to audience questions.
If you have a question, please come to the microphone.
Did you want to field that? I mean, your list is quite comprehensive, and I think all of them are apropos. I think all of those dynamics were at play. You know, the writers, in the course of writing the show, which is their day's work, they're also trying to amuse and stimulate themselves. And I think they come at a large theme like community from every angle they can think of. In the course of 6 years, imagine what it was like to be in that boiler room where they cooked this stuff up. But they're smart guys and well-read, and so they wanted, depending on the episode and the storyline and the dynamics of the day, I think all of those things are going to come into play. I know at first it seemed sort of a Lord of the Flies, survival of the fittest kind of thing. Oh, we must pick the hunky male to be our leader because he can cure us of disease, and you know, all of that. But then it grew more nuanced, I think, as it went along. Surely you can top that.
I don't know.
Well, what about Ben? I mean, how does Ben command authority? Is it by being
That's a good question.
Hunky male?
No, but he does it by being the smart guy, the best chess player in the world, the great strategist. That's all brain power. But I think he ultimately finds that insufficient and tires of being alone at the top, and maybe delights in the warm embrace of humanity to a certain extent. Well, I never felt like the saga was really over. I just felt that for this little band of pilgrims, that they have reached a kind of resting place. I don't know what's next. But that the tension between the three wheels you described, which I think is so apt. I mean, the writers must surely be familiar with that material, because that is perfect. The tension between those three, the places where they rub against one another and create sparks, that's what the show was about. So that's such a great observation. I felt like everything was still at play at the end. I didn't feel like it was too neat. I mean, they needed a sense, you know, this is where maybe philosophy and drama have some tension between them. Because there had to be a sense, there had to be some satisfaction. You know, just like a piece of music needs an ending, so does an epic like Lost. And I think they did as well as they could. I wouldn't have had it any other way. I can't tell you how delighted I was with my character's positioning at the end. It was stiller, grayer, more neutral and more ambiguous than I dreamt they would ever think up for me. There was it was like Beckett or something. I was just so thrilled with being left there on the bench of eternity. So I wouldn't, nor do I think Ben would have had it any other way.
Come on. Surely he would have had Sawyer and Kate together.
Wow,
Just saying.
that's a lot of passion there.
I'm just saying that's what Ben would do.
He has a special power. Hurley tells him as much in that little tacked-on epilogue deal that we did. Nature of that power? I mean, Desmond has a special power too. Some people seem to be able to pass through the membrane of dimensions and just be or appear to be other places. And so I'm assuming what the others, and I don't know how the others always knew these things, but they wanted to get a closer look at him, run experiments, do what they usually did, do things in the name of science to try to analyze or quantify a thing that is magic, or it's magic until we figure out why it's not.
How should I feel about that? You don't have to answer that.
The questions that the show wrestled with seem to be opportunities for enlightenment. And so the show ends with answers, I guess. Peace and serenity, couplehood, empathy, love are the answers to the questions the show has been asking for 6 seasons. Yes, it was like a whole new character. And when I realized that Terry was, without us even realizing it at first, playing another character, I thought, oh darn, that would be so much fun. Because it's great to be Ben every day, but after a few years, you kind of like to maybe break out of that. So yes, here I was, I got to play a completely different character. He's painted in some of the same shades as Benjamin Linus, but they're more muted, or they're grayed out. They have white or gray mixed in with them, and they're softer. He's like pastel, sort of thing. And that was fun, to try to calibrate the mix of Ben traits. What was the new mix, and how much of each? Yes, he has. We have to show that he has a whisper of that old Ben ambition, but it rings a different note now, and it's not as consuming or ruthless. So that was a lot of fun.
That sounds like another way of asking the question, what makes us really who we are? Because here we have 2 Bens, and they both sort of have to be Ben, even though they're dramatically different.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a core of Benness. And for you, it's his ambition, essentially.
There is that. Well, many qualities that are his. Dry wit, meticulousness, yes, ambition, edginess, dissatisfaction. A lot of those things are present in both those characters, but the recipe is a little jumbled.
So let me just jump in there for one more second. It does seem to me like it can't be a completely different past, in particular because of the way Hurley is. It sure seems as though Hurley's transformation into someone who no longer feels totally unlucky and instead feels lucky is a result of his moral progress on the island. And that means that the 2 pasts can't be completely disjunct, doesn't it?
Yeah. So you could say too that Ben has a redeeming chance to be the better father figure in his sideways life.
Having had the experience.
Yeah.
Lost, losing his daughter.
Maybe unconsciously,
Yeah.
some atonement. Well, we were confused about it. We'd sit around on the set and go, okay, it's not grace. Because at first you thought, oh, it's a white light. Surely it's a good thing. And then we thought, okay, what it does is it strips away the non-essential. It releases essences.
That's pretty good.
That's really good.
You have a lot of spare time on the set. And you try not to slip over the line into seeing things humorously. Like, oh, there's Jack putting the giant pacifier into the hole where the white light comes from, or it's just, it gets late at night and you get a little punchy.
Do you accept this characterization of mother as good? Of the mother of the mother who raised.
Oh, the mother of you mean Allison Janney?
Allison Janney.
I love Allison, and yes, she's very good.
She's good.
Yeah, she's good, but yeah, she was kind of, I don't know what to make of that character. She was ruthless.
You think fathers are twisted?
Yeah, we don't deal with motherhood often in this. Well, always a dysfunctional motherhood. Always an inability to procreate was one of the themes. But then she's a bad mother. She's like a ferocious, like the wolf mother of Romulus and Remus or something. But there's a lot of baby stealing going on.
Fair enough.
Well, I liked his wit. Every so often Ben would get off a good one. And I had more and better jokes than you all ever saw. They would often end up getting cut. I think because they ended up being a little too light for the tone of the show.
Do you remember it?
Oh, there was one where Jack was being held underground in a fish tank thing. I came in telling some shaggy dog, 3 guys come into a bar kind of a joke. And my challenge, and the script direction said that Ben tells the joke badly. And so I stayed up the night before thinking, how do you really tell a joke badly? What is it about bad joke telling? I had really sweat over this thing. And I told it and I thought, I freaking nailed it. And then they cut it. But back to the business. So sorry, what was I saying?
You answered the question.
Oh, okay. There's all kinds of different categories of scenes. Funniest moment, most moving moment. The greatest scene I ever played on that show was the one where I talked John Locke out of hanging himself and then strangled him. I cannot tell you what a day at work that was.
How do you explain that to yourself? Was it just that you needed the piece of information, the name of
Yeah,
talking?
yeah, he needed that name.
Right.
And as he explains later in his crazy, matter-of-fact way, I just didn't have the time to talk you back into killing yourself. And it's so heinously cold to hear it said, but it is practical from his point of view. He didn't have a lot of time.
One more question of that sort is, how does your Ben Linus hear Jacob's question, what about you, Ben?
Well, he hears it in a way that motivates murder. He hears finally that his emperor has no clothing, that his emperor is fraudulent and worse, cares nothing for him, that he has given his life and made terrible moral compromises on behalf of an empty Godhead, on behalf of a guy that hasn't even got the TV turned on, that isn't even watching him, that doesn't know him and doesn't care. That's when, because I think up until that moment, Ben may or may not do what John Locke's body has asked him to do. But then it's, once again, a kind of adolescent rage wells up in him, and he just can't stop himself.
I have a question about the significance of two incidents. In the beginning of the show about pushing the button as the numbers were flipping, whether or not that was going to be significant to the sustainability of the island. And secondly, with Claire giving birth on the island, it didn't seem to get played out too much, but what was the symbolism behind the fact that in a place where there was not supposed to be that allowed, that's why they brought Juliet there, because women couldn't carry a baby. Did that have some significance more than just the relationship?
Yeah, I think there was a sense in which Aaron was chosen, but honestly I can't tell you. It didn't get, that's one of those threads that got left hanging, I think. I've wondered that myself, and I don't have a good answer for you. As far as the pushing of the button, that was a thing where they toyed with us in the audience, making us question, that kind of belief behavior. And we went back and forth on it. I went back and forth on it. I think the writers went back and forth on it, not knowing whether it was, ultimately we saw that was it important enough because an interruption in that circuit would cause this terrible electromagnetic incident. But we sure questioned it for a long time. To have awakened from...
In season 6, in the Flash Sideways, how everyone remembered their time on the island. We see a few glimpses of Ben remembering Desmond, but we never see. I feel like it would have been important to see him remembering Alex and remembering Danielle.
We shot one. We shot one that was left out, and I'm not really clear. I think because it tipped something or spoiled. We shot a scene where Ben, Flash Sideways Ben, is sitting at home looking at a yearbook from the school where he teaches, and he gets to the page where Alex is, and I had to play all this stuff. And the lights all go wonky, and we see, scenes of, him being beaten, and all the terrible stuff that happened on the island comes flashing before his eyes. It didn't make the final cut, did it?
No.
You don't remember seeing that, do you? Because I thought, wow, did I dream it? But yeah, we shot such a thing, and I think they did it because it would have begged the question of Alex being his mirror redeemer, and I don't know if they didn't want to bring her back or if she was unavailable, maybe, to shoot. Well, because it would have spoiled this better idea that they got about Ben being on the bench. Now that I think of it, I think that's how that came to happen. But that's an observant question.
Isn't there something incestuous about Alex being Ben's mirror redeemer?
Theirs is a purely platonic relation. No, they're not related by blood or anything. No, but
That
we're talking about things that transpire in the hereafter. Things are pure there. You're beyond, the concerns of the flesh and all of that. I'm shocked that you brought that up. I think that when I started out, it was playing a part that I'm drawn to, that I have some success with it. I like a sense of danger and lurking malevolence, and I like the ambiguity of it, so I'm drawn to the role for that reason. And then after you play it for 5 years, then you lose track of boundaries and overlapping and stuff, and pretty soon, you wake up one day and you go, wait a minute, am I acting? When did I stop acting? Some days you just go to the studio and you put on the clothes and you just start saying the words, and you think, wow, it's supposed to be more homework than this, but sometimes it isn't. And then you begin to worry. And then there's a related worry, which is, oh my God, I'll never be able to shake it. I will just play this character for the rest of my life. So yeah, you do play some, it does cause you some consternation and some worry.
So do you like him?
I do.
You do?
Yeah, I like all the funny, and my unfinished answer about the parts I like best about playing Ben are his dry wit, but I also like scenes of domesticity. When Ben cooked dinner for Juliet, how weird was that? He's pulling muffins out of the oven and he's carving the ham and pouring wine as he's wearing an apron. Come on, that is so crazy contrary to the character, and yet somehow it's so satisfying.
Or the book club.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Maybe lessons is too strong a word, but there's a lot of rich material, and I think it's what kept people coming back, that idea of second chances, that idea of if you can shake yourself out of the rut you're in and find a new life, a new perspective, a new beginning, that you can change your life. The power of love. I mean, all those things are present in there, and 100 others that I could think of. But I think there are many worthy themes in the show, and I'm proud to have been part of the presentation of them.
Thank you. Maybe also what you were referring to earlier about the emperor with no clothes. Sometimes made me think of the Gnostic belief that the entity we think of as God is just the demiurge. He's just the guy who has a little bit more power than everybody else, and made some stuff.
Yeah.
But he's not the nice guy. The nice guy's out there somewhere, almost inaccessible, and this guy that we've been bowing down to and
Right.
placating and all those things.
Sounds like Jacob.
Right.
Yeah. Demiurge. That's good. My favorite meeting was the last and most gratuitous one, where I'm standing at the well with John Locke, and Sawyer has taken my gun away from me. And out of the blue, and completely without provocation or necessity, Sawyer just goes, whoosh, like that. Why? and Ben goes, ugh. And I thought, here I am again, on my knees, on the dirty ground with blood running out of my face. But we were running out of episodes, so but that was a good one. In general, not to be enjoyed, really, the fight sequences, because no matter how careful you are, somebody's gonna get hurt.
Did you get hurt?
Yeah. That scene in season 6, where I confront Desmond, who's in his car, and he comes around the hood of the car and punches me. That punch that you saw, they used it. They used it in the show. That was a for real hit. We got off distance or something, I don't know. Next thing I know, I have my head down on the hood, and I'm checking to see if my eyeballs are still in the sun.
You guys still friends?
Yeah.